My name is Ava Collins, and I used to believe that love could survive anything, even greed. I grew up in a small town outside Dallas, Texas, where people waved at each other on the street, where Sunday dinners meant everything, and where my parents, Thomas and Linda Collins, were considered the definition of a perfect couple. My father ran a small construction business, my mother was a local realtor, and I was their only daughter, the girl they swore was their pride and joy. From the outside, our lives looked spotless, a big white house, a garden full of roses, and framed photos of smiling faces on every wall. But behind those perfect smiles were cracks I never saw until it was too late. It all started after my father's business began to crumble. He'd taken risky contracts, borrowed from the wrong people, and when the market turned, everything fell apart. Instead of asking for help or telling the truth, my parents decided to gamble with something far more dangerous: me. At the time, I was 24, working as a nurse in Houston, proud to finally stand on my own feet. I used to send money home every month, thinking I was helping them stay afloat. One night, I got a call from Mom, her voice trembling. She said Dad wasn't feeling well and that they needed me to come home for a few days. I dropped everything and drove back, heart pounding with worry. But when I arrived, the house didn't feel like home anymore. The air was heavy, the windows covered, the rooms darker than I remembered. Dad sat in his recliner, smoke curling in the air, while Mom smiled too brightly and said, "It's so good to have you home, honey." Something was wrong. I could feel it. Over dinner, they acted nervous, avoiding my eyes. Then Dad cleared his throat and said, "Ava, there's an opportunity we want you to be part of." The words made no sense at first. He talked about a man named Richard Lane, an investor who was helping the family business. He said Richard wanted to meet me, that he thought I could be a valuable partner in a new project. I asked what kind of project, but my mother just smiled and said, "It's complicated, sweetheart, but it could solve everything." I didn't understand then, but I would soon. The next day, Richard showed up, a man in his late 40s with slicked back hair, a gold watch, and a smile that felt like poison. He acted charming, asked about my job, my future plans, and even complimented my eyes. But when he spoke to my parents, his tone changed. It was cold, transactional. I caught phrases like agreement, repayment, and her consent. I confronted them that night, demanding to know what was going on. My father exploded, shouting that I was ungrateful, that he'd sacrificed everything for this family. My mother started crying, saying, "It's just for a little while, Ava. He's investing in your father's business, and you'll just help him manage the office. There's nothing wrong with that." But there was. I found out through a friend of my father's business that Richard had paid off nearly $50,000 of my parents' debt. In exchange, I was supposed to work for his company, essentially as collateral. I couldn't believe it. My parents had sold my time, my future, my independence for money. When I confronted them again, my father said coldly, "You owe us this, Ava. We gave you everything. It's time you give something back." I felt my chest tighten like it would break. These were my parents, the people who raised me, protected me, kissed my scraped knees, and now they were trading me like an asset. I packed my things that night, but when I reached for my car keys, they were gone. My mother stood at the doorway, crying and begging, "Please don't make this harder than it has to be. We just need this chance." I realized then she wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she was scared to lose the deal. I slipped out through my bedroom window, grabbed my old bicycle from the shed, and pedaled through the empty streets under a sky that felt like it was watching me. I didn't stop until dawn. I stayed with a friend in Dallas for a few weeks, too ashamed to tell anyone the truth. But Richard didn't stop calling. He left messages saying things like, "Your parents are in trouble because of you." Then one night, he showed up at my friend's building. That's when I called the police for the first time. They said without a restraining order, they couldn't do much. So I went to a lawyer, trembling, scared, desperate to protect myself. That's when I met Caleb Morris, a young attorney who believed me when no one else did. He helped me file harassment claims and started digging into my parents' financial records. What he found made my stomach turn. The contracts Richard had signed weren't just business deals. They were personal guarantees tied to my social security number and fake employment records. My parents had used my name to secure the money. It was fraud, and now I was legally bound to it. I felt sick, trapped in a nightmare I didn't choose. Caleb said we could fight it, but it would take time, and I'd need to stay quiet while he gathered evidence. Those months were the loneliest of my life. Every sound at night made me jump. Every phone call made me panic. I'd stare at my parents' old photos, wondering how people who said, "We love you," every day could sign away my life like a piece of paper. But something inside me began to harden, not into hatred, but into resolute. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to end it. They thought they could sell their daughter's loyalty and walk away untouched, but karma was already coming for them. They just didn't know it yet.
The months that followed were a blur of court documents, sleepless nights, and quiet rage that burned low and steady, like an ember I refused to let die. Caleb became the only person I trusted. He worked late hours in his cramped office, a single lamp glowing while papers covered every inch of his desk. Every week, he'd call me in, show me new evidence, and each time it was worse than the last. My parents hadn't just forged my name, they had transferred ownership of small company shares to Richard's corporation, under my identity. On paper, I was listed as a silent business partner in a venture that was laundering money through fake construction bids. They had tied me to a crime I didn't even know existed. The betrayal wasn't just emotional now, it was legal, permanent, and potentially ruinous. Caleb filed injunctions, froze the accounts, and warned me that the case would expose my parents publicly. I said I didn't care, but deep down, a part of me did. I wanted them to understand what they had done, to see their perfect little image crumbled the way they'd shattered me. Meanwhile, I kept working as a nurse, pretending everything was normal. I smiled at patients, comforted families, and then went home to an empty apartment that echoed with silence. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be my parents, but they never called. Maybe they knew what was coming. One night, I found an envelope under my door. No address, no signature, just my name scrawled across it in my father's handwriting. Inside was a short note that said, "Ava, don't do this. We did what we had to. You'll destroy us." I tore it in half without reading the rest. They had already destroyed me. A few days later, Caleb got a call from an anonymous source. It was someone who used to work for Richard. He agreed to meet us at a diner outside Dallas, and when he showed up, he looked terrified. His name was Martin, and his hands shook as he stirred his coffee. He told us that Richard had dozens of similar deals across the state, families desperate for money who sold out their own children's identities in exchange for cash. But he said my parents' case was special because Richard bragged about how my father had offered me first, calling me his most valuable collateral. The words made my stomach twist. Caleb recorded everything. A week later, the FBI opened an official investigation into Richard Lane and his network. Suddenly, the power shifted. For months, that man had made me feel small, helpless, but now his empire was collapsing. One by one, his partners were arrested, his accounts frozen, his name smeared across the news. I watched it unfold on TV, numb and silent, until I saw something that stopped my breath. My parents being escorted out of their house in handcuffs. They looked pale, broken, nothing like the confident people who once told me to be grateful. The neighbors stared, the cameras flashed, and I felt an unfamiliar mix of satisfaction and sorrow. I didn't celebrate. I just stood there, watching karma unfold in real time. The trial was long, public, humiliating. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Everyone wanted to know how a respectable couple could betray their own daughter. My father refused to look at me during testimony, but my mother did. Her eyes were swollen, her voice trembling as she said, "We never meant to hurt her. We thought we were saving ourselves." The judge wasn't moved. The sentence came down heavy. Richard got 15 years for fraud and racketeering. My parents each got 3 for aiding and abetting. I didn't attend the final hearing. Caleb called me afterward and said, "It's over, Ava." But it didn't feel over. It felt empty. That night, I drove out to a hill overlooking Dallas, parked my car, and sat in silence. The city lights shimmered like tiny lies in the distance, beautiful, but false. I cried for the little girl who once believed her parents would never hurt her. I cried for the nurse who thought hard work made you safe. And then when the tears stopped, I started laughing. Quiet, bitter laughter that turned into something lighter. Karma had done what I couldn't. It had taken everything from them. They had sold me for cash, and in the end, the same greed devoured them whole. Over the next year, I rebuilt quietly. I moved to Los Angeles, changed my number, started working at a new hospital. I didn't tell anyone my past. I became someone else, not the victim, not the betrayed daughter, but a survivor who knew how the world really worked. I rented a small apartment with a balcony that overlooked the city, and sometimes I'd watch the sunset and wonder if my parents ever looked at the sky from their cells and thought of me. Caleb called me one evening and said my parents were eligible for early release. I didn't say anything. He hesitated, then said, "They asked if you'd visit." I told him I wouldn't. I'd already said goodbye the night I left that house. They'd had their chance at love and traded it for money. There was nothing left to talk about. Still, sometimes at night I'd dream of my mother's voice calling my name, soft and desperate, and I'd wake up with tears on my face. But every morning after, I'd remind myself, karma doesn't need witnesses. It just needs time.
3 years passed before I ever heard their names again. By then, I had built a new life, one that no longer smelled of fear or guilt. Los Angeles had become home, not because it was kind, but because it was honest. People here didn't pretend. They took what they wanted, earned it, or fought for it. I fit right in. I had been promoted to senior nurse at the hospital, running trauma shifts and mentoring new interns. Patients trusted me, colleagues respected me, and for the first time in my life, I felt whole. But no matter how far I ran, I could never truly outrun my blood. It found me one quiet Friday night when I came home from work. A letter sat on my kitchen counter, slipped under the door while I was gone. My name was written in my mother's handwriting, shaky, faded, desperate. Inside was a short note. "We're out. We're sorry. Please meet us before it's too late. Mom." I stared at the paper for a long time, my chest tight, my hands trembling, though I didn't know if it was anger or something worse. Part of me wanted to burn it. Another part needed to see what sorry looked like after all these years. So I drove back to Texas, the highway stretching endlessly beneath a sky full of lightning clouds. When I reached our town, everything looked smaller. The bakery on Main Street was closed, the park was overgrown, and the house I grew up in had a foreclosure sign hanging from the porch. I found them in a rundown apartment complex on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like mildew and hopelessness. My mother opened the door. She looked like a shadow of herself. Gray hair, trembling hands, eyes that had lost all sparkle. My father sat on a couch inside, thinner than I remembered, a cough racking his chest every few seconds. They both froze when they saw me, like they couldn't believe I was real. My mother whispered, "Ava, thank God." I didn't speak. I just walked in and stood there, arms crossed, waiting. My father finally said, "You look successful." His voice was dry, empty. I wanted to ask if success was what they saw when they looked at me, or if they just saw the reflection of everything they'd lost. My mother started talking fast, how prison had changed them, how they had nothing left, how she prayed for me every day. She said they just wanted forgiveness, a chance to make things right. I stayed silent until she said, "You know, we did what we did because we thought we had no other choice." That's when I finally laughed, a sharp, cold laugh that filled the room. "You always had a choice. You just never chose me." My father looked down, maybe from shame, maybe from pride still trying to hold on. He muttered, "We paid for what we did." I stepped closer, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "No, Dad. You paid what the law demanded. Karma's still collecting." I turned to leave, but my mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was weak, but desperate. "Please, Ava, we don't have anyone else." I pulled my arm free and said, "You had me once, and you sold me." Then I walked out. I didn't look back. On the drive back to Los Angeles, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt done. Some wounds stop bleeding long before they heal. Others never heal at all. They just become part of who you are. When I got home, I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and finally allowed myself to breathe. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. Months went by after that visit. I focused on work, volunteered for community health drives, and even started writing a column for a medical magazine about emotional resilience and personal trauma. I never mentioned my family by name, but my words were sharp and honest. The article went viral, millions of views, hundreds of comments from people who said, "I thought I was the only one." It was strange how telling the truth, even in fragments, could set people free. One evening, I was leaving the hospital when Caleb called. I hadn't heard from him in a while. His voice was quiet, careful. "Ava, your father passed away last night." I didn't say anything. He added softly, "Your mother asked if you'd come to the funeral." I said no. There was nothing left for me there. But after hanging up, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I wasn't sad, but I wasn't indifferent either. It was something in between, like watching a chapter finally close. A week later, another letter arrived. It was from a lawyer in Texas. My father had left a final message for me, recorded before his death. Against my better judgment, I listened. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Ava, I know I can't ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know that everything I built, everything I lost, was nothing compared to you. I was a coward. I thought money could fix what I broke, but I learned too late that love can't be bought or sold. You were always the best thing we ever had." I sat there in silence after the tape ended, tears slipping down my face before I could stop them. I didn't forgive him, but I finally understood that his punishment wasn't prison. It was living long enough to realize what he'd done. Karma hadn't just taken their money or freedom, it had taken their peace. And that was far more brutal. Months later, I visited the hill outside town where the sunset tainted the sky orange and gold, the same place I used to go as a teenager when life felt too big. I brought no flowers, no words, just a quiet sense of finality. As I stood there, I whispered, "You got what you earned," and the wind carried it away. Back in Los Angeles, life kept moving forward. I was promoted again, leading a small trauma recovery program for women who had survived manipulation, abuse, and betrayal. I told my story one night at a conference, no names, no hometown, just truth. When I finished, the room was silent, and then someone started clapping, then another, until the sound filled the space. For years, I thought revenge would make me feel strong. But standing there, hearing those women clap, I realized it wasn't revenge that healed me. It was purpose. My parents had taught me what greed looked like. Life had taught me what justice felt like. And karma did the rest. Today, when people ask me if I believe in forgiveness, I tell them this: forgiveness is overrated. What people really need is understanding, the kind that sets you free without pretending the past didn't happen. I wear a small silver necklace now, the one my mother gave me when I was 16. I used to hate it. Now it reminds me that even the most broken things can still be carried, not as chains, but as proof of survival. Some nights, when the city goes quiet and the wind hums through the window, I think about how my parents' story ended, not with power, not with wealth, but with silence. And I think about mine, still unfolding, built from every piece they tried to take. Karma found them first, but it gave me something greater in return, a second chance to live on my own terms. And that, more than anything, is justice.